our script, we have our arguments that we're passing into it. We have some automated test coverage, and then we also have a lot of our logic inside of a reusable object. So now what I would like to do is implement some logging. And so you can see here that I have a couple of print statements that print, for example, the arguments when the application starts up. Here we print in the top words, which I'm assuming would be like the output of application. And generally, if you have a larger application, you will want to have some kind of way to know what it's doing, especially if it's a long-running script or like a service. And so it would not be practical to have a bunch of print statements, right? Because while you're developing, you may want to have some very granular messages so you can see what's happening in great detail. But then when the code is tested and it's in production, you probably don't want to see all that information. Logs do accumulate, and then it becomes very hard sometimes to go through them and to maintain them. And so that is why we use something called logging. And with logging, we can control how much messages our application produces depending on the log level that we set. And so let's go ahead and turn this on. So we can import the logging module, and then what we need to do is we need to configure it. So I'm going to do this right over here, and the logging module for Python is very elaborate. And logging is part of any kind of standard programming language. And so one of the things that we need to configure here is the log level and then the format of our messages. So Python has the shortcut method that we can use for this, but I highly encourage you to check out the documentation and see what other cool things you can do with logging module. So logging.basicconfig, and then we're going to pass two arguments here. The first one is going to be level, and I'm going to call this level, let's just start out with login.debug. So, and then here, let's set up our format. So the format is something that personally I copy and paste it every single time I need it from some other script I wrote. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it, and then we're going to go over it just so I don't have to do all this typing. And so this is going to be the format of our log messages that the application will print. So this is going to be the time. This is going to be the log level of the message that's being printed. This is going to be the process ID, the function name, and the actual login message that we specify. Process ID is not required, but good to have. When your application starts up, it's going to have a unique process ID on the system. If you're running a multi-threaded application where you're doing some parallel processing, I highly suggest you also include the thread ID in here as well, so you can see what the different threads are doing. Alright, so let's go ahead and try this out. So logging.debug, test debug message. So let's run our code. Alright, and it's here. Look at that. We got our test debug message right here, along with the time, the log level of the message. So that's this debug here is because we have debug over here, and then we have the PID, which is the process ID. And then we can also add an info message. Test info, and then let's see how that works out. Okay, and so that's cool. We see the debug and the info messages in here. And so the difference between these different messages is essentially the log level, and this is what we use to control what gets printed in different environments. So, for example, info should not be very verbose, and it should just tell you basic things about how your application is running and how it's doing. So think when you ship your application in production and maybe somebody else is using it, info would be the default log level. And then debug level is only for very granular debug messages that would be maybe for troubleshooting or for developer. And the way that we can control this flag is by setting this to info. And so now this logger will only print any info messages to the screen. We can leave the debug messages in the code, but they're just not going to be printed anywhere. So let's run this again and see. And you can see that now we only get the info message. And so what I usually like to do in my programs is I implement an additional flag to control this. So let's add this here. Argument v. And this is going to be a Boolean argument, and it's kind of strange in Python. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say action equals store true. By default, it's going to be false. And then this is going to say, turn on debug logging. And then here we can add a conditional statement saying that, okay, so login.debug if args.v else logging.info. And so this will let us control log level by specifying a command line argument. Right, so now let me go ahead and clear the screen. When I run it by default, I will just see, what do we got here? Oh, I got a typo. Alright, so when we run it by default, we got our test info message, which is cool. And then let's say that we are working on this program and we're making changes and we need to debug it. We need some more verbose output. We can pass a -v flag at the end, and then we'll also get our debug message here as well. So let's go ahead and swap out some of these messages for our login messages. So this is going to be a login info. This is just going to be a print statement. And we can actually go through and do the same thing in our object as well. So we can import login in here. And then we can say here, for example, maybe login.info started my counter. And then maybe here we want to have some additional verbose output, and we can say, okay, login.debug updating the counter with, and then just say words. This is what happens when you have to switch between programming languages in your day job. Anyway, so now we see that we have our multiple login statements, and then by default it'll run with info log level. And if we wanted to pass wanted to see like the individual actions that the object was doing, we can pass a v, and we can get a bunch more logging here that if you're troubleshooting a program, it'll be helpful to go through and kind of look at this. So yeah, use the login module. Don't use print statements inside of your application, and check out the standard documentation for the login module. There's a lot of different things that you can do with it in terms of having multiple loggers with different formats, with different log levels, so it can get pretty elaborate. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. If you like these lessons, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you.